There's a damp patch on your forearm right now. Your dog put it there about 30 seconds ago. You hadn't just come home. You weren't eating anything. You hadn't even said its name. You reached down to adjust the cushion behind you, and in that small window where your hand drifted within range, your dog lifted its head off the rug, leaned forward, and laid its tongue across your skin in one long, unhurried sweep. Then, it lowered itself back down, eyes half closed, as if a small piece of business had just been completed. People tend to file this gesture under one of two headings. It's a kiss, or it's the taste of salt. Each of those carries a thread of truth. But neither one comes close to describing what your dog is actually doing, because researchers studying canine behavior have been quietly mapping this gesture from several different angles, through wolf packs, through puppy litters, through hormone studies and neurochemistry, and the answer that's emerged from all that work is stranger and more layered than either of the two casual explanations. Once you understand what they've pieced together, that quiet lick on your wrist starts looking like an entirely different communication. In everyday conversation, the licking gets folded into the word kissing, and it's easy to let that label settle, as if the dog had observed people in the house exchanging affection and decided to produce its own version of the same thing, scaled to its anatomy. When animal behaviorists first started picking the gesture apart in earnest, that assumption was the first thing they tested. They wanted to know whether the lick was something dogs had imported from us, a behavior absorbed through generations of living indoors, or whether it was something the dog had, carried in from a much older place, long before our species crossed paths with theirs. What they found pointed firmly in one direction. In the late 1970s, ethologists watching wild wolf packs in their den seasons started noticing a behavior that didn't fit the standard image of wolves as ruthless hunters. When an adult wolf returned to the den after a kill, the younger pack members would crowd around its face and lick frantically at the corners of its mouth. It looked like greeting. It looked like affection. But it wasn't either of those things. The licking was a request. Adult wolves carry food back to the den in their stomachs, and the puppies, too small to follow on a hunt, trigger regurgitation by licking at the older wolf's muzzle. The behavior is hardwired. It appears in puppies who have never seen another wolf perform it. It works on the first attempt, and it works because the receiving wolf is biologically primed to respond to it. That gesture, the muzzle lick, is the ancestor of the lick your dog presses against your wrist. Now here's the reframe, and this is where the explanation starts to shift. When your dog licks you, it isn't translating a human kiss into dog vocabulary. It's reaching for a behavioral script that's older than your living room, older than domestication, older than agriculture. A signal that, in its original context, said something very specific. I trust you. I am not a threat. I am acknowledging that you are higher in this arrangement than I am, and I am asking you to take care of me. That's what the puppy is communicating to the returning adult at the den. And researchers studying domestic dogs have found that the gesture has carried forward almost intact, not because it still results in food, but because the underlying social, meaning never had to change. Your dog is using a language that predates every word in this sentence, and the message it carries is one of the oldest your dog has access to. There's a second layer running underneath all of this, and it's chemical. In 2014, a research team at Azabu University in Japan tracked what happens inside a dog's body during sustained close contact with its owner. They measured oxytocin, the same hormone that surges through human mothers during nursing and through couples in long-term pair bonds. What they found was a feedback loop. When a dog and its owner spent time in close physical contact, oxytocin levels rose in both of them, in parallel. Licking is one of the gestures that sits squarely inside that loop. When your dog licks you, two things are happening at once. The dog is performing a learned social behavior with deep ancestral roots. Yes, but it's also triggering a small chemical release in its own brain. A pulse of the same hormone that in human terms gets associated with calm, safety, and attachment. In other words, the gesture isn't only outbound. It isn't just a message your dog is sending you. It's also something the dog does, because, on a neurochemical level, doing it makes the dog feel better. Researchers studying canine stress responses have noticed something interesting in this data. Dogs in unfamiliar environments, dogs recovering from a startle, dogs separated from their owner and then reunited, all of them tend to lick more, not less. The licking functions as a self-soothing behavior wrapped inside a social one. So when your dog presses its tongue against your skin, part of what's happening is a small, private act of regulation, performed in your direction. Now, in households with more than one person, something quietly selective tends to happen with the licking. Most multi-dog owners assume their dog distributes the gesture evenly. A lick for the partner, a lick for the kids, a lick for whoever happens to be on the couch. Watch carefully over a few weeks, though, and a pattern almost always surfaces. The licking concentrates. There's usually one person whose hands and face the dog reaches for more often than the others, and the choice isn't random. Research on how dogs read human faces has been accumulating for over a decade now, and one finding keeps repeating. Dogs are highly attuned to the emotional state of the people around them. A 2018 study at the University of Lincoln showed that dogs distinguish between human facial expressions and respond differently to a sad face than a neutral or happy one. They orient toward distress. They extend physical contact in its direction, which means the licking isn't just affection or habit, it's targeted. When you've had a hard day, when your shoulders are tight, when you're sitting more quietly than usual, the dog reads it. The lick that arrives in those moments is the dog deploying the oldest comfort behavior in its repertoire, the one it inherited from a den thousands of generations ago, and aiming it at the person in the room whose state seems to call for it. What looks like a small, casual gesture is, from the dog's side, a reading of you followed by a response calibrated to what it found. And none of it, is sitting on the surface of the dog's behavior by accident. Domestication didn't just change what dogs look like. It changed what they do with their faces, their tongues, and their social attention. When researchers compared domestic dogs to wolves raised under identical conditions, the differences in human-directed behavior show up early, and they show up consistently. Dogs orient toward human faces faster. They sustain eye contact longer, and they engage in close contact gestures, including licking, at rates wolves simply do not match. A 2017 study tracing the genetic architecture of canine sociability found something striking. The same gene regions associated with hypersocial behavior in humans, regions where deletions produce a condition marked by an unusual drive toward connection, show structural variation in domestic dogs that wolves don't carry. In other words, the dog that licks your wrist on a quiet evening isn't doing something its ancestors invented in the last few generations. It's expressing a trait that was selected for, deliberately or otherwise, across thousands of years of living alongside us. The instinct to make physical contact with humans, to seek closeness, to maintain the bond through gestures the human can feel, is woven into the dog at a level deeper than training reaches. Your dog licks you because, at some point in deep history, the ancestors of every dog alive today were the ones who licked, who pressed close, who softened the distance between species with their tongues and their eyes. The dogs who didn't make it into the pedigree. Most licking is harmless. Most licking is exactly what it looks like. A small social signal performed inside a chemical feedback loop aimed at the person the dog has chosen to direct it toward. But there is one distinction worth understanding, because it changes what the licking actually means. Veterinary behaviorists draw a clear line between social licking and compulsive licking. Social licking is contextual. It arrives when you sit down. It arrives after a separation. It arrives when the dog reads something in your posture and decides to respond. It starts, it finishes, and the dog moves on. Compulsive licking doesn't follow that pattern. It happens in long, unbroken sessions. It continues past the point where the dog seems to be enjoying it. It often shifts off the human entirely and onto the dog's own paws, its flanks, the corner of a blanket, the leg of a chair. The behavior stops looking like a message and starts looking like a loop the dog can't easily exit. The two are running on different machinery underneath. One is a communication anchored in the bond. The other is a self-regulation strategy that slipped past the point of helpfulness, and it usually points to something else going on: anxiety, boredom, an underlying medical issue worth checking. A dog that licks you when you sit down, when you come home, when the room goes quiet, is doing exactly what its biology designed it to do. A dog that can't stop, that licks for an hour, that licks itself raw, is telling you something different, and it deserves a closer look. So the next time your dog presses its tongue against your wrist on a quiet evening, here's what's actually unfolding. It's reaching for a behavioral script older than language. It's running a small chemical reward loop in its own brain. It's reading something in you: your stillness, your scent, the angle of your shoulders, and responding with the oldest comfort gesture its species has access to. That isn't a kiss in the human sense. That isn't the salt on your skin. That's your dog telling you, in the only language it inherited, that you are the one it has chosen. If this changed how you see that small wet press on your wrist, subscribe and drop a comment below. Does your dog lick one person in your house more than everyone else? And if you've been watching this series from the start, the bond behind all of this was forged thousands of years ago, when the first wild ancestors of your dog pressed close to a human fire for warmth. That was our very first video. If you haven't seen it yet, that's where the whole story begins.